session of the day. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. So coming up, we have a session all about the role of reconnection in creating a movement. So as we make our way to the next normal, we have to decide what we want it to look like. What are we taking with us, and what will we leave behind? Internal communicators play a key role in connecting employees within an organization, and now it's your turn to shape the narrative and create your own movement. So, here to facilitate our topic, the power of comms compels you, please welcome back Ralph Jung Pearl.
We are down Rebecca, but she'll be here in a second. Yes. And we're good on time? We're good on time?
Yes. But where's our... here.
Just coming up, hun. We'll find you a mic. Oh, wait, look, it's in your chair. It was ready for you.
Oh, yes, I thought I had more time. Apologies for the delay.
Yes. Hello? Yeah, okay. No, wait, I put it aside because you couldn't do anything. No, really amazing. Welcome to the last session. So we've been celebrating the big reconnection the whole day. We learned about the power of internal communications. We learned about the importance of internal communications, especially when we talk about the next or the new normal. So I'm really happy to host the last panel discussion for the day before we head to the evening reception. And I would like to welcome our speakers, another amazing panel, and I would like to introduce you to introduce yourself and tell us who you are. So maybe you want to start.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Deborah. Deborah Madeleine. I work for Mars. Mars is known to be a chocolate company, if you know, Twix, M&Ms, and so on, but we also have pet care products. I'm a senior learner experience manager at Mars University, and I'll pass over to Rebecca.
Hello. Rebecca Sangster-Kelly. I am a communications stakeholder management coach. And you're like, what on earth is that? So I help teams and leaders communicate, and some individuals through office politics. And my background is as a management consultant who became obsessed with communications.
And I'm back again for my unscheduled appearance earlier today, but this is the panel I'm supposed to be on. So again, I'm Lindsay. I'm the lead behavioral scientist at Scarlett Abbott. I hold a master's in behavioral science, and I'm also write for Forbes around employee engagement.
Welcome and thank you. So, as I said, we've been talking a lot about the important role of communications and what role communication plays in the post-COVID workplace narratives. So I'd like to ask you, what exactly do you mean by that? How should we create a movement? Like, what does such a movement need, and what is actually important for going ahead?
Maybe I can start by
Please.
having a definition of what is a movement. And I'd love to hear your perspective as well. So I'm not a communicator. I've been invited here because I have created and led a movement at Mars of 10,000 people over the last 2 years. And I can testify for the effectiveness of building a movement. So what is a movement? Basically, a movement brings you from a place to another place. It's kind of a change management techniques. And you can compare it to a mandate where it's very top-down, and a movement is more like ground-up. And a movement may be taking a bit more time by involving people in a process to reach your final destination, but it's going to be more sustainable. It's going to be more engaging for people versus a top-down that can be very quick but less engaging. So a movement basically is a way to engage people in a change management process,
Can I ask you a question, a follow-up on that? So during one of the breaks, when someone at a different conference was asking me what I was talking about today, and I mentioned this concept, and they immediately went to negativity, like, oh, people are rebelling in the workplace. So do you think there's differences between positive movements and negative ones? And if so, what characterizes those differences?
Love that question. So it's like anything. Anything can be used for good or used for bad. And you can also look at activists that are leading and creating movements around the planet, and you see good movements for good and also bad movements. So of course, in our case, it's very kind of controlled. The movement leader is somebody with, has a mission to drive this transformation. But it is, I've heard some people being scared of giving the power to the associates, to the employees, into driving a movement.
So what I'll add to this is I think we can get overwhelmed with a movement being big, but anytime we use communications, we are moving our employees to an act. Or at least we should be thinking through what that act is. So any movement, whether it's getting a team to use a payroll process properly, or getting people to adopt a new performance plan, or anything when we want to make an impact, any movement with people, we shouldn't underestimate that effect because it takes time and planning to move people to do anything they don't necessarily want to do.
Is there a critical mass, would you say, like a tipping point of numbers that constitutes a movement, or do you see like suddenly there's a lot of momentum that wasn't maybe there before? What would you say that?
That's such a good question. So in terms of numbers, I can't tell you exactly what was the tipping point. I felt the tipping point. The tipping point for like the way I look at it is when we reach a critical number of people having the ability to act, to show the change that we're looking at, and that snowballs into the rest of the organization. So we initially had a target to have 10,000 people join the movement without necessarily showing the action that we wanted to see, but at least people engaged in, interested in joining. And then out of that, we recruited 1,000 champions, so people that were acting, that were showing the different behaviors that we wanted them to show, and then that moved into a snowball effect. So really it's finding this critical point, number of people that have the ability to demonstrate the change in the organization.
So can you tell us what does it actually need to create a movement? And what do we need for a movement? What makes it a movement?
What's the recipe?
Yeah.
So I gave a workshop.
Maybe you can just tell some secrets.
I believe that is paid content, folks.
Sorry. But I think, and please add to it, but the first thing was to have a purpose, like a very clear purpose. Our movement was about bringing design thinking as a capability in the organization. Our purpose was not to bring design thinking in the organization. Our purpose was to put the users, the consumers, the customers at the heart of everything we do. So that was a more compelling purpose that connected with the values of our business. And then out of that, we brought in capabilities like design thinking and design thinking training to bring that to life. The beauty of having a purpose that's in line with the values of the organization and a bit broader than the exact change you want to bring is that you can find allies in the organization that are going to help you foster that message and make your movement even bigger. So I looked at other areas in the business that we're looking at also with the values of putting people at the center of everything we do, and looking at what I call the pillars of the organization, so trusted legacy programs in the organization that have been there for a long time, because I was coming in as an outsider with my pink hair, and I was like, yeah, people at the center. So who was I to do that? But I looked at the traditional systems, like I looked at our system and looking at really legacy partners and allies to really bring that purpose forward. And it's not a purpose you can't agree with. Like it's so broad and generous that we were able to bring some allies along the way. So that's one of the recipe ingredients that I have in my workshop.
Thank you for telling us.
I don't have a workshop. Just want to make it clear.
So when it comes to a movement, getting the momentum and all that is important. For the communication part, we can have an idea of why it's important to us, the organization, but we have to look at what motivates the person to want to follow through. Because we can tell them it's a great idea. We can tell them, we're going to save money. You're going to have a better lifestyle. You're going to have a better work engagement. But if you don't understand your employees and what motivates them to come to work, to choose A over B, you're going to be talking a different language, and it's going to be noise. To be able to get their attention, you need to cue in your wording and cue in your messaging that either promises something they are motivated towards or risks it being taken away. So the fear of it losing it, or the desire to attain it, is how you can motivate people with the messaging by figuring out and profiling them of what they actually need from this.
I'm really glad that you touched on motivation, because I actually think motivation at work is probably one of the most important topics, because every single day, your employees, as well as probably everyone in this room, we ask ourselves one question, right? We ask ourselves, how hard am I going to work today? And that answer is going to fall somewhere on a scale of the minimum amount of work to not get fired and the most I can do if I'm really motivated and engaged. So I think starting with unpacking motivation, yes, for movement, but really before you do anything is where we start at our consultancy. And motivation is really a mix of, you have to have the ability to do something. So are we making things easy that we're asking in the movement? We have to potentially get some reward for it. So are we thinking about what are those reward mechanisms? Or we have to be really inspired by the impact that we could have, which I think ties back to purpose. So when I'm thinking about how am I going to motivate people, and people are motivated by different things, those are usually the levers that I play with.
Yeah, and to build on it, talking about understanding what people want, so what motivates them. We were preaching about design thinking. We use design thinking to also design the movement. So really interviewing and engaging our associates in the process of creating the movement. So when we started from zero, we actually did some cold calling through Skypes at the time with people that had, I'm Deborah. I was looking at all the Deborahs at Mars and say, hey, what do you think about user centricity and design thinking? And then we moved into, so we talked to 400 people at that time, through all of us, just to connect with people, engage, understand what they think about it, their resistance. We loved hearing about from the skeptics, because that really gave us the clues on how to unlock really talk to them. And the purpose that I mentioned earlier was co-created effectively with these associates.
So today we also heard a lot about emotion, that emotion is important for storytelling, for communication. How important are emotions for creating a movement?
I guess I'll start incredibly, if I were to sum it up in a word. So emotion is a key ingredient in behavior change, and if we're not inspired, or I think going back to the storytelling panel, for those of you that were listening to that, how are we tugging on heartstrings? How are we tapping into those different emotions to make people feel something? Because I'm not going to join a movement. And I guess this is especially important when your only reward is impact. So if you can pay people to do stuff, then fine, emotion's not as important. If you make it really easy, fine, emotion's not as important. But if your motivational lever is impact, that is really where tapping into emotion has to be a huge part of your strategy, because otherwise, why would I care? So I would say, yeah, when you're thinking about impact, emotion's really where you're going to want to play.
I can just add a build on it based on my experience. So when we recruited these 10,000 people, we had an onboarding welcome journey for them to a personalized, it's automated, but it's personalized journey to make them feel welcome with a welcome video. And then for our champions, I actually send them a written postcard to each of them to really thank them for their commitment to the cause. I've sent hundreds of postcards across the world, and I think that made a difference from an emotional level and connection that would sustain over time.
And Lindsay said my favorite phrase, why should they care? Because that's what I ask when I work with my clients. They say, we need to do this, we need to do that. I'm like, yeah, so why should they care? Why would they care? And we like to think, especially when we're working with executives and working with numbers, people are rational. No, they are not.
I wouldn't have a job if they were. That's literally what behavioral scientists do.
I'm glad you brought that up. That is her raison d'etre, everyone. That's why you need a behavioral scientist. Yeah, people are not rational. You are not rational. As much as you think you are not. So everything is tied to emotions. People make decisions based on emotions. And I'm really glad that behavioral economics is now a thing, because economics are like, no, people make rational decisions. So no. So if you leave today with this conference, no one is rational. Everything's emotional. Invest in storytelling, invest in understanding the emotional draws.
So if we're all rational, a rational approach to start a movement, to unlock the emotion, wouldn't help?
Well, I think you need a rational purpose because you need a business case and no executive's going to sign that off otherwise. But you need to think, you can't stay in the rational realm if you're going to engage effectively, because what makes sense and how people filter information is not rational. They filter it through what they care about, what's on their mind, like even if they hit a dog on their way to work.
What they had for breakfast.
And their choice of breakfast food.
Or if they ate breakfast at all.
They might listen to an influencer who tells them, this will happen if you do this, and that is not rational. So we are in a very irrational, we just need to accept that, and then we can move forward.
But I think there's also this idea of like, we set things in motion, but then we don't always have control of the narrative. So again, coming back to what we talked about in the storytelling panel is everyone sort of interprets things a bit differently. So, and I'd love to get your take on this, but like once the train has left the station, back to your point that we're not always predictable or rational, like we don't necessarily know what people are gonna do with it. And when you get numbers of people with highly charged emotions, like does mayhem just like happen, or what have you seen?
Good question.
So back to that question around rationality. So there is some logic to the process of design thinking, but it leaves space for emotions to be heard. And I think and to also acknowledge, what are some behavioral science you can use to drive certain reactions based on, like, from a design perspective. And to your question around, what happens, like, with so many emotions.
Is it like a mob mentality, or?
And yes. So what happened is it's in a positive way. I had these 1,000 champions, and I gave them some kits to create their local design thinking clubs. So I was telling them the recipe on how to create their club, but I was not telling them exactly what the club should look like and what they should do with it. And then that's when magic happens, because you have people charged with emotions, with whatever they ate for breakfast or didn't have breakfast, and it decides kind of what they're going to do with their club in there. So we had clubs doing learning design thinking to help their site with sustainability, because that was their thing. And then we had another club looking at inclusion and diversity on their site, because they could apply design thinking to help their site with that. So, and we had another club who created a design thinking corner in the office, and then we were able to share all of this with each other. So I think magic really happens when you have people that are really highly emotionally connected to the purpose, and give them a bit of freedom to also express their preferences.
So I realized I was a bit irresponsible just saying, everyone's irrational, be ready for it. Talk about the process. There is a space for, when you know your audience, you understand the history, you understand how they're going to react to words, they react to topics, and it's also about the importance of evaluation mid-communication. Because if you're not ready to evaluate the impact and then realize, ooh, okay, we overstepped, or that hit a nerve we weren't sure of, or that's surprisingly working, then you know what to do with it. So if you follow communication like it's an experiment, where you are controlling the levers, then you are in control with potential, but without understanding the risks and opportunities, you're not going to get the full value of experimenting with your communications.
So how much control do we need for creating a movement, especially because, Deborah, you said the experiment you started was like building those clubs, but not telling them why they will build. So
no, I told them why. I didn't tell them how. No,
okay.
I told them how. Sorry. Told them why. There's a new why, big purpose. Then how. I give them a recipe on how, first step, put your members together. Second step, bring some food, like some guidelines on what not to do and what to do.
Did you say the second step is to bring some food?
Yes.
Oh, brilliant.
Yes. Food
That's
unites
the answer
people.
for every problem.
Yes, and that's another thing. Like, we didn't take ourselves too seriously either in the messaging, the tone of voice. We had a tone of voice that was a bit disruptive from the corporate tone of voice, and I was not part of corporate affairs. I was like just a rebel in the house I had a massive budget and a lot of good ideas, I think. And yeah, we went wild with emojis and a tone of voice that was a bit disruptive. And yes, bring some food, put people together, and use design thinking to design your club, actually, so you can learn how to use design thinking while you're also helping us provide design thinking capabilities across the organization. Did I answer the question? I don't know, but I think it sounds good.
I mean, but you've planted the best idea of the day, which is always bring food, so.
Breakfast.
So, since we're here talking about internal communications, what role plays internal communications in creating a movement? What do you think?
So usually, internal communications is invited to the party really late when people want things actioned, and internal communications needs to be there at the very effing beginning. So if there's one thing with any project program, how to use channels, how to plan, how to do evaluation, because unless internal communications is involved in the very beginning, the program and project is going to suffer because they're not going to get the value of the engagement, which is the enabler of the activity.
I can also share my experience with internal comms because we didn't collaborate that closely. It was a bit of a pirate ship versus internal comms that were very scared of what we were doing and breaking the tone of voice. It was kind of new. It was about 4 years ago when we started. And now I see them kind of embracing the same style that we did 4 years ago. And I wish I had internal comms with me as allies from the beginning. But it was a bit scary for them, which I understand also.
So, what is actually the homework for internal comms besides bringing food? So, what would you advise internal communicators to do now?
Learn design thinking.
Well, I
Join
mean,
the movement.
It depends on what they're trying to accomplish, because it's so context specific. So I wouldn't know how to even begin to answer that, other than starting with problem diagnosis, which is probably the first step of design thinking, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. And sorry, go ahead.
No, I just have a library in my head of different books that I always think like, ooh, that one. If you want to ease into behavioral economics, The Choice Factory, and I'm forgetting the author's name, but The Choice Factory, he lays out 25 behavioral theories that you can apply to your messaging. And it's done in a very practical way in 25 steps of this is what it is, this is how it can be used, this can be the outcome. So if you're interested in looking how to use words with your behavioral aspect, I found that quite helpful in terms of if you know someone or you are that person who's like, oh, I'm not a scientist, or Lindsay looks a little bit scary, she's not going to help me. I'm joking.
It's the heels, isn't it?
Maybe.
And the power dress.
It works.
Thank you.
Yeah. But yes, I would say The Choice Factory would be my recommendation.
Thank you. I wanted to, when I was doing, creating a movement, I had a role in communication myself. I was writing newsletters and such. But a big part of my role was community manager, because you were building a movement with people, for people, connecting people together. So I wonder if there's something, if you're in internal comms, to starting exploring the role of a community manager, if it's a role you would want in your team to really animate, moderate, facilitate a movement.
And I mean, that right there is behavioral science too. I think so much of what we already do is more rooted in kind of psychology than we give ourselves credit for. So you talk about community and ambassadors. There you go. There's social normative behaviors right there on a platter. So I think we do more of this in our day-to-day work than we actually give ourselves credit for. So in terms of that getting started, I would say most of you are already on that path, and the rest of it is just in the spirit of making things even better. It would be even better if you did X, Y, Z. Which is also the name of my book title, which I didn't get to plug in the prior panel. I just mentioned there was a book. So finish that. I closed that loop.
And also, as I mentioned before, we need to leave this victim role. So now we heard a lot about the theory of creating a movement. Do you maybe have some examples where you would say that was actually a really good example that we could learn from, besides also your design thinking?
Oh, yes. So, sorry, I thought, I already shared some of my examples, but I have another one.
I'm sure.
No, not my example, but something I got inspiration from as I was building my skills into. I have a master's in packaging science, so nothing to do with building movements. But I actually, But so as I was upskilling myself, I was looking at skills like activists groups, like really like people that are trained and that do that as part of their job to build movement and bring change. And when I think about groups that have inspired me into what I've done is looking at groups like Extinction Rebellion, for example. If you look at what they've been doing, it's very like building movement, bringing people together, like by the book. Like if you look at their strategy, there's a lot to be learned there to apply within internal comms and building movement internally.
Do you think they have a clear, ask, though? Because I think they've done a great job of building momentum, but any time that I was around and I saw the actual, sit-ins or street blocking, I could never work out what they were actually asking for. So do you think that a big part of activism and building a movement is having that clear outcome? Because I've never actually seen that with Extinction Rebellion.
Oh, really? Yeah, no, I've been to a couple, so I'm not part of the group, but I've seen them a couple of times, and for me, they've always been very clear, so it may be like bad organization, I don't know what happened. But yes, there is this one moment where the change has happened, because a movement can't go forever. You can't have the energy of people forever and all this emotional charge forever. So we look for the signal, the moment we know that something has happened. If you look at civil rights movements and women asking for, fair representation and equality, then voting was that one moment where they were focusing on the one thing that would be a symbol of change for them. It doesn't solve all the issues, but there was something very precise that they were looking to change and really bringing everyone towards it. So yeah, it's important to have this one piece. For us, it was a bit like we were looking at this critical mass of people to have the capabilities around design thinking. I was also looking for other signals, like having user centricity in job descriptions that didn't appear previously, or having user centricity mentioned in legacy programs at Mars. So these were the elements where I knew we had made a difference.
My example is a bit more boring because it's a Gartner case study, but I did like it a lot. And it was about using internal comms to bring down excess spend. And what they did, and I believe it was a pharma company on the continent, they gave people the task to bring down excess spend, but the task they gave them is they didn't want anyone to book flights less than 2 weeks in advance. And they had a meter showing how much money they'd saved. And there was one ask over how much things they could be spending money on. It was something people could measure that they purchased a ticket ahead of time. They did their bit. They moved towards the goal. And it was having that goal and being able to measure success through their input rather than saying, we need to cut costs, and be like, okay, get the spreadsheets out. It was a way to people to show they were part of the solution. And it can be just that little thing that helps people feel that they're part of something. It doesn't have to be complex. It's having that simple ask that they can feel, I can add that to my task list, and I can make sure that I am able to be a part of that.
And I guess for me, I don't have an example per se, but rather more questions. So you brought up two very different movements, right? Extinction Rebellion and the Civil Rights Movement back in the 60s. And what strikes me as very different in those, which I also think might contribute to their effectiveness, is sort of the leadership style within each, right? So Civil Rights Movement had a hierarchy, it had a leader, it had a figurehead, and I think that when you have that, you might get results a bit faster because it is a hierarchy, decisions are made, there's a strategy, there's a figurehead, and then you have something like Extinction Rebellion or even like Occupy Wall Street, and there's no figurehead, right? They're all organized sort of through distributed networks. And so I just would be curious on your opinion between movements that have a figurehead and movements that are from distributed network, and if you think one is more effective than the other, or if they serve different purposes for different contexts.
You have so many good questions. I'm amazed. I like Occupy Wall Street is a case study for how not to do a movement. So in the books, so you're right about like the ineffectiveness of not having like a straight, like a direction. Extinction Rebellion, I don't know the details. So, and in my case, I know that my pink hair was a thing. Me being the face of it was a thing. Me having my face and a handcrafted note in newsletters was impactful. And still today, I've changed jobs. People still come to me. There's somebody else doing the job I was doing. People still think, and they think I was leading the team even. So there's something about the cult of a person that can be useful as a mechanism. Yeah. Sorry, I was looking at her, but it was for you, of course.
Actually, it's a good time to maybe ask the audience do you have questions to our three speakers?
And I know we're the last thing standing between you and drinks.
So, Lindsay, that's it's not a question as much as a comment. So I agree with you regarding Extinction Rebellion. I'm actually speaking with the co-founder of Extinction Rebellion in 2 weeks' time, Gail. And her and I have co-written a book together. When I was reading her chapter, it was very clear that she started the movement, but she's not always there with the movement. And it is, you're very also right when it comes to networking. So a network movement, I don't know what you called it, but yes, it's a branches of networks. And I also agree with you that whenever you see extension, so I'm ex-BP, for example, so they were our best friends. So whenever you see them hanging themselves or tying themselves to our offices, there isn't a clear message of what they want to do. But I think what unites them is the end goal, which is save the planet. But I don't know if they've got it right, and how do you want us to save the planet?
So shared purpose without a plan is
I think so.
a bit meaningless.
I'll
Not
share-
meaningless, but ineffective.
You know, I mean, it's an open event, so if anyone wants to meet Extinction Rebellion in person, please let me know, and I'll extend the invitation for the book launch. But it's a question I'm going to ask her, actually. And I'll share with you as well the chapter that she wrote, and hopefully that would put all three of you to peace when it comes to movement.
Well, it would just satisfy a long-standing curiosity I've had every time I see their protests.
All right, I think the time is over. So thank you very much for this amazing panel discussion again. And we're through. Like, it's the big reconnection happened, and I'm going to hand over the microphone back. Thank you very much.